I would imagine that when you first spotted this tasting on your planner, you were a bit bemused. Was this some tie-up to see the difference between fake tanning and fake tannins? Sorry, that was awful. But it turns out the growth of Essex is one of the most interesting stories that we have found in the world of wine recently. Through my adventures at Plumpton and Jamie's judging English still wines with the IEWA, we spotted a slightly strange phenomenon. Wineries all over the country were producing incredibly high-end still wines, even in tricky years. But when you ask the winemaker where the grapes came from, they used to go a bit sheepish. Clearly, there was a label here they didn't want to wear loud and proud. And it turns out that Essex was England's dirty little wine secret. Despite that, from all across the country, winemakers had been travelling to this tiny little pocket, which just seemed to be doing things that other parts of England couldn't. Now yes, we will accept that the county might have a bit of an image which clashes with the world of high-end wine. You'd probably get a different impression pulling out a bottle of Burgundy to a bottle of Essex at a dinner party. But that is what we're here for, to challenge preconceptions and to expose true excellence. Now England's green and pleasant land is a sweet spot for many crops. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too wet, too dry. We rarely get the extreme weather events like tornadoes or droughts or cyclones that much of the rest of the wine world gets. But for grape growing, it is a lot more marginal. You see, there are two bands that run all the way around the world, one in the North Hemisphere and one in the South. These both range between 30 and 50 degrees of latitude. Now, if you're in that area, you're seen as a wine place, and well, most of England is quite a long way above that. Chablis in Burgundy, for example, is at the cooler end of the traditional wine region, at a latitude of 48 degrees. Essex, though, is around 51 degrees. Now, while that's a lot less of a difference than to, say, Yorkshire, it does make a difference. But that is only one part of the story. Firstly, global climate change is shifting the average temperatures, meaning you have to go closer to one of the poles to get the cooler weather that you used to get, say, 20 or 30 years ago. The other factor is that the top vineyards in places like Chablis are around 200 metres above sea level. Of course, the higher you get, the cooler you get. So if we want to produce warmer climates in England, we've got to look at putting the grapes lower down. The problem with that is that the lower you go, the bigger the risk there is of frost damage, which is a huge problem here. If you want to avoid frost, you want to be on a slope, so it can drain away somewhere where it doesn't damage your grapes. You can also help by being near a large body of water which acts as a heat source, protecting your slopes. And finally, you want to be south-facing to catch as much of the sun as possible. The other big thing to mention in terms of where to put your vineyard is the rain, because the more rain there is, the more chance you have of getting disease in your vineyard, which can destroy your harvest. Grape growers have to spray the crops all year round to protect them if they're under such severe pressure from diseases. So to sum up, if you're going to make great wine in England, you want to be a little bit north of Burgundy to compensate for climate change, you want to be a little bit lower down than Burgundy, you want to be near the sea on a south-facing slope and in a particularly dry part of the country. There are lots of parts of England where some of those things come together, but there is only one place where all of them simultaneously come true. And it turns out that the only way is, you guessed it, Essex. And perhaps best of all, the Crouch Valley. If you are looking for somewhere to plant grapes to make sparkling wine, there are better places. The chalky slopes of southern England on the Downs, Kent, Hampshire, Sussex, they stand out. Here, of course, you don't need to get the grapes as naturally ripe, because in the process of making it go fizz, you add some sugar, and that allows you to hit a desired alcohol level much easier. That secondary fermentation which adds the fizz adds around 1.5% more alcohol to the final wine. But when you're looking for still grapes, it's most definitely East Anglia and Essex that tick all those right boxes. Here in the Crouch Valley we find one of the highest densities of vineyards in the UK, spanning along the south-facing slopes down towards the River Crouch. Over the rest of the tasting, we'll see how these grapes are getting transported all across the country into some of the coolest wineries and making immensely successful wines, winning prizes in the top wine competitions. But of course, I wanted to see it for myself. So, I lowered my car's suspension, laid my seat back, styled my hair, put on the sunglasses, and set the sat-nav for just east of Chelmsford, and hit the road to visit Newhall, one of the earliest wineries in the region, having seen the potential as far back as 1969. These are true pioneers of the English wine scene. So we're here at Newhall with Rachel and with Steve, and who are the winemaking team here, the senior winemaking team. We have Steve, who's the senior winemaker, Rachel, who's the assistant, is also on the business side of things, the winery management. Mm-hmm. So we're here today to obviously taste the wines that we're going to be trying this tasting, but also just to hear a bit more about Newhall and its rich history since 1969. Obviously, you guys weren't here back in 1969, no. But I mean, what an incredible gamble to take on an area where I don't think anyone else was really doing much around here at the time.
I don't think so at the time. No, I think Bill Greenwood back in the day. I think he'd looked to. He had an arable farm at the time. I think obviously wanted to do something differently. I think his son Piers was sort of working and training in Germany. And I think at that point, they saw the potential for the area for still wine varietals. And some sparkling as well, the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I think took a gamble, and I think brought over vines from Germany, planted them up. So I think the first vines went in sort of 69, 70. So you're looking at the Pinot Noir, which is in the front here, and then Reichensteiner as well, in around Meadow. And then a lot of the other Germanic varieties followed in, the aromatic styles and so on for stills. But pretty impressive going back that far. It's
very impressive.
It's a lot of history, which goes back, like 3 generations. So it's pretty impressive.
There's not that many wineries in this country that you can say 3 generations with. No,
that's right. And I think the other thing that the vineyard itself sort of follows that history in terms of what was fashionable, if you like, what was being grown, what was seen in terms of the climate, what were the right vines to plant at that time. So you can sort of see the ages as things moved and things changed as you go around the entire estate.
So have you been keeping a lot of the older things that you grew, or a bit of grubbing up and replacing them?
As far as our experience, Rachel and I, we've just grubbed up sort of 10 acres of Muller Thurgau, which we already have a fair amount of already, and we're looking to replant that area with some more red grape varieties to help go into the Baron's Red. So we'll be looking to plant varieties of Cabernet Noir, Frühburgunder and Regent, to which nice peewee varieties, which are a lot more disease resistant, should give a lot more richer, curranty fruit flavours to the Baron's Red and a bit more body and structure as well. I think the Muller Thurgau, it's had its day. It's time to move on. So there's a big section of field that is virgin ground, unplanted, alongside the section that we've just grubbed up. And I think this period of the rebranding has initiated a bit of a every year I think there's going to be a consideration going forward to grub up a section and replant, whether it's the same or a new variety, a similar variety, who knows.
But I think it's really cool that you're still using some of those peewee varietals, the hybrids that they're going to be coming in to try to keep at the forefront of will work in a bad year, and because we can't all just be relying on stuff that's coming in at sort of 5% potential alcohol in a rubbishy year. That's exactly. Not helpful.
Not at all.
No.
So, perhaps we should start off with the Pinot Noir Rosé.
It's what I think I described it to one of my colleagues as sort of a grown-up rosé.
Okay.
I say that because I think that it. I think that it goes particularly well with food. I think it is a wine that matches very nicely with different foods. I think it's the sort of wine that often people look at rosés and think that's lovely to drink by the glass, but not necessarily match with food. Yeah. They may be rosé drinkers and they're struggling to think, well, what would I have with my dinner? Sometimes there can be a clash with rosés and food often, especially if they're on the sweeter side. This, however, is much more of a dry, crisp, but still has that fruity character. But I personally think it just goes very nicely with different foods and would match really nicely with quite a few different meals.
I completely agree. I think it's it's got the acidity to cut through with that, which you wouldn't necessarily get in some of the ones. But I think you're getting a lot more of the fruitier flavours still, but without the sweetness.
Yes, exactly.
And yet you've still got that cool salmon pink colour.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that partly because the skins aren't getting as much colour into them as perhaps you'd get in some of the other rosé varieties that are used, or?
Yeah, well, again, the Pinot Noir, it's always going to be a lot less colour with that. I think the colour's hard to look after with Pinot Noir. And again, just not too long maceration time. Again, we're pressing off and we're just fermenting more sort of neutral, and it keeps that subtle elegance. It's not a fruit bomb. It's not overly jammy with the fruit at all. But again, I think the Pinot, it's got that salmon pink, borderline sort of Provençal sort of hue to it, which it's always going to turn out that way with the Pinot Noir. But yeah, pretty pleased with it. It's come from Leidenfield, which is right towards the back of the estate. It's usually Pinot Noir that's destined for sparkling base wines, for the traditional method fizz that we do. But this year we saw a parcel that was in the winery, and we thought, this is going to be pretty good for the still rosé. We also blended it with sort of just under 15%. I think it was 14% Pinot Meunier from the new Churchill plantation, which does support it a bit more, gives it a bit more structure. I think it's certainly not a really smooth and linear, fruity, easy drinking rosé. It's got that structure and that poise that I think, as Rachel said, lends itself to more of a food friendly wine.
Yeah, for sure. And the complexity is really, really clear on that one. So, what do you think it is about the Crouch Valley and here where we are that makes it such a great place for growing grapes?
We don't get a lot of rain.
Usually,
yeah, touch wood. But
yes, absolutely. We don't get a lot of rain, and certainly our estate, we don't get much frost either. So good. We only have, very small, even in the worst possible year. I'm not here, but I've heard it retrospectively that even in those years, we were hardly touched by frost. So certainly on this estate, that's beneficial. But my understanding is it's all of the factors coming together. So the weather, the sort of lower rainfall, the lower chances of frost, soil, etc., which makes Essex in general, but specifically Crouch Valley, the perfect place to be growing grapes.
And does the frost sort of just drain down towards the sea then, basically, or
it's because of the and we do get it, but not in the times when it would be dangerous for the critical quiet. We've obviously got sea breezes that come through from over the back there, and I think that again just moves that frost away or avoids it starting in the first place. So we're very lucky from that instance. Yes.
Brilliant. No, that is a cracking wine. I'm sure people are going to love it. Thank you very much, and we'll come back and talk to you a bit later about the red blend.
Great. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Cool.
Just a few miles away from the vineyards, we find ourselves in Burnham-on-Crouch, and it's painstakingly aware of just how close to the sea we actually are. And you can feel, even on today, the hottest day of the year so far, such a wonderful cooling breeze. The grapes really appreciate that, but they appreciate it more in the winter when it's cold, as it warms them up, believe it or not. It can be very easy to get carried away by the recent success of the English wine industry. It is still immensely marginal in many years. In the last 2 years, for example, we were hit by vicious late frosts, which meant England made far less wine. But this year it is looking exceptional so far, with this period of sunshine coming at just the right time for flowering. This new scientific approach to winemaking, spawned by the likes of Plumpton College, has meant that we are able to ride out the bad years and still make really good wines, even when the going gets tough. Last year alone, there were 130 award-winning wines from England at the International Wine Challenge. And for such a young industry that is literally battling against the elements every year, that is an incredible achievement. So anyway, let's get back to the studio and find out what you think of Newhall's Rosé.